Trump's executive order repealing birthright citizenship, that is blatantly unconstitutional. Denaturalization, which is to strip rights from people who previously had citizenship, is part and parcel of taking away people's citizenship so they have no right to have rights. Trump is trying to mess with citizenship in multiple ways to reverse the racial tide of immigration and to go after political opponents and to suppress dissent. It is easy to get overwhelmed and disillusioned and just throw up your hands and say there's nothing I can do. But there is a big difference between what Trump's aspirations are and whether he can carry it out, and it's not a done deal.
Welcome to episode 257 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. This is Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism works to unite all who can be united to join in mass nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, growing to include millions and refusing to stop until we create such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program or even maintain his hold on power. Big thanks to our patrons, everyone who rates, reviews, shares the show, and reps our merch. Every bit helps connect more people with Refuse Fascism. So after listening to today's show, please rate, review, share, etc. Today, we are sharing an interview with Anna Olah to discuss Trump's attacks on birthright citizenship and his intent to strip people of their citizenship. She is the Herbert Kurtz Chair in Constitutional Rights at CUNY Brooklyn College. Her forthcoming book, available next spring, is The Origins of American Citizenship and Migration, African Americans, Native Americans, and Immigrants. But first, we face an emergency situation. Fascism is rapidly consolidating. Here is This Week in Fascism and some highlights in This Week in Noncompliance and Resistance to Trump's Fascism. Over the course of this past week, the regime has come after its perceived enemies in media and culture. CBS Paramount's cancellation of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert comes in the wake of Paramount paying a $16 million settlement to Trump for a bogus lawsuit against 60 Minutes and Colbert speaking out against it. This has the pungent odor of appeasement to fascism. Their claim that the cancellation was purely for economic reasons is also unconscionable. In the face of advancing fascism, even if there are financial considerations, this is a time to support dissenting voices, not to cancel them. In effect, this is collaboration with the Trump fascist regime's suppression of dissenting voices and culture. It comes on the heels of the Trump regime and their MAGA Congress drastically defunding PBS and NPR, and Trump openly threatening to revoke the citizenship of public critics like Rosie O'Donnell and Zarham Mamdani. Now, Trump has written on Truth Social, quote, "I absolutely love that Colbert got fired. I hear Jimmy Kimmel is next," end quote. Colbert is not leading or even calling for marches on the White House, but fascism cannot suffer criticism or satire, reaching 2.4 million households every night. Similarly, PBS Kids alone helps shape the minds of millions of children across the country, and PBS member stations reach more than half of Americans annually, all ostensibly guided by general principles of serving the public. It's right there in the name. For fascism, this simply will not do. As military institutions are purged of books that challenge white supremacy, misogyny, and American exceptionalism, as the Department of Education is run into the ground, it should be no surprise that they are now cutting funding to one of the largest institutional supports of multiculturalism, of empathy, of diversity, and inclusivity. They are using these actions to set boundaries for institutional and mass media opposition, which they cannot afford as they set out to exponentially expand the brutality they are inflicting on immigrant communities, on LGBTQ people, on people of color, on women, and more. In addition to programming hosted by PBS and NPR, these cuts stand to decimate local journalism, investigative journalism, and the pursuit of truth as a whole, leaving the field wide open for billionaire-owned rags peddling fascist lies. This must be turned against the rulers. The fascists want anyone with a platform to think that if Colbert can get fired for skewering the regime in ways that are still mild enough to get past CBS's notorious censors. And if NPR and PBS can get defunded for promoting the basic concepts of multiculturalism and empathy, then it's too dangerous to use whatever influence you have to say really anything at all. But this has to be turned on its head. Instead of being scared into even tighter self-censorship, celebrities and influencers need to recognize that the safety they seek is an illusion. All those who play it safe, who stifle, contain, or minimize their opposition to fascism for fear of tarnishing their brand, who contort their dreams for a better world into mealy-mouthed nothings, who refuse to name the person, the regime threatening all of humanity in favor of a wink and a nod, they must see this censorship and recognize that neutrality is an illusion and it does not keep you safe. Fascism will not allow neutrality. So if you don't want to turn into a de facto cheerleader for the regime, you can't. You need to use every ounce of influence you can muster and just say it plainly. Trump must go now. Turning to the assault on immigrants, the regime has now eliminated the right to bond for immigrants who entered the country without papers. This means that in immigration proceedings that often stretch out to years or even decades, people will have to fight for their rights from inside ICE detention. As nightmarish as mass deportations are, we are witnessing in real time how that fascist promise often evolves into even more massive detentions before often turning to mass extermination. Hundreds of immigrants are being rushed to fill the beds at Alligator Auschwitz in Florida, with accounts of a 15-year-old being sent there after a traffic stop. More than 2/3 of its 700 detainees having no criminal charges, and Democratic representatives conveying eyewitness accounts of deplorable conditions, lacking basic sanitation, privacy, or access to counsel. This, along with dozens of 911 calls for help from inside this concentration camp. That 15-year-old was transferred out of Florida's infamous concentration camp quickly after people found out about his detention there, and placed in a shelter maintained by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We don't know what happened to him after he arrived there, but we do know that the thousands of children detained by that office are also facing increasingly dire situations. As innocuous as the Office for Refugee Resettlement title sounds, Stephanie McGrumman, reporting for The Atlantic, has found that, quote, instead of being reunified with sponsors, children are being held for longer and longer periods of time. ORR figures show an average of 35 days in January had become 191 days by May, end quote. Her article titled, "The Message is, We Can Take Your Children," details how protections for undocumented youth are being ripped up with devastating consequences, creating legal black holes for endless detention, effectively establishing little black sites for children and teens across the United States. As immigrant children are fed into the detention machine, many young children of undocumented people are facing deep uncertainty. In preparation for the possibility of being detained, deported, or even permanently separated, undocumented parents are flooding legal support groups with heart-wrenching requests for help to make alternative arrangements for their children's care. This fear was driven home this week when a young father was seized by ICE, literally while dropping his child off at preschool in Oregon. In addition to more funding, more officers, more detention sites, more technology, ICE has now been given access to information for tens of millions of Medicaid recipients across the country, including home addresses and ethnicities. No longer will ICE only be grabbing brown-skinned people off the street, but now they will know exactly where the people they aim to ethnically cleanse live. 7 states provide Medicaid to non-U.S. citizens using state and not federal funds, and it's perfectly legal for non-citizens to access certain Medicaid services through so-called emergency Medicaid. This move will end up turning people's most desperate moments, facing illness or injury, into opportunities for ICE to pounce on. Meanwhile, this new development will serve to give ICE a vast array of information on tens of millions of citizens, a lawless organization that has detained and deported citizens, a masked militia which the president has unleashed against anyone in their way. That's who will have home addresses, birth dates, social security numbers, and racial and ethnic information on the poorest people living within these borders. What they end up doing with that, one can only imagine. But the arrest of ICE protesters may give a window into that future, with federal agents in Washington state arresting 9 citizens, including the former city council president of Seattle, over protests they engaged in to stop ICE. Similarly, Professor John Caravello is facing federal charges over a protest that he participated in Southern California against a massive ICE raid on a cannabis farm. Caravello reportedly sprang up to dislodge a tear gas canister that the National Guard or federal agents had shot into the undercarriage of a protester's wheelchair. For this, he is facing felony charges of assaulting a federal officer. Listen here from George Bettis, an American citizen and veteran of the U.S. military who was detained by ICE for days after that same raid Caravello was protesting on the farm where Redis worked.
George Redis is a 25-year-old disabled Army veteran and a United States citizen. He works as a security guard at Glass House. That's a legal cannabis farm in Ventura County, California. And last Thursday, as you might have seen, federal immigration agents raided that farm. Masked, militarized agents descended on the area with what they call less than lethal weapons, which include rubber bullets and tear gas and the like, seemingly used indiscriminately against the crowd of workers and protesters who had shown up. Redis says he clearly identified himself as a citizen, but federal agents ignored him. They smashed the window of his car and dragged him out at gunpoint. The U.S. veteran then spent 3 days in detention without ever being charged with a crime. He was denied a phone call, legal representation, and medical care despite being pepper sprayed and tear gassed during the raid. His family had no idea where he was or how to contact him.
I thought he was probably part of the protest, and he wasn't. He was trying to reverse his car. They broke his window. They pepper sprayed him. They grabbed him, threw him on the floor. They detained him. His wife's been trying to call and ask where he is. They don't know where he is. Apparently, no one associates with nobody. So now we don't know what to do. We're just asking to let my brother go. He's a U.S. citizen. He didn't do anything wrong. He's a veteran, disabled citizen. It says it on his car.
George Redis was released on Sunday without being charged, and he joins me now. Mr. Redis, it's good to have you. Thank you so much for making some time for us.
Yes, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Let me just start. You've been released in detention. How are you doing physically? Are you physically okay after what happened?
I have a few scratches on me. I still have some OC on me, so sometimes when I rub my eye or something, I'll still have the burning effects. I'm cut up a little bit, but other than that, I'm pretty good. I still have yet to check on my my other injuries, but besides that, that's it.
Will you first tell me just what it was like the moment when you realized what was happening at this farm? You work for a third-party contractor, you're security guard at this farm, and just describe, did you realize when all these folks roll up that was ICE?
So my first thoughts were in shock. I was in disbelief that all this was happen. Honestly, I thought it wouldn't be a problem to go to work as long as I did nothing wrong, as long as I identified myself who I was. And clearly, it didn't matter if I was a citizen or if I was a veteran or if I identified who I was at all. It didn't matter to them.
Tell me about the moment when you're in your car amongst this chaos, when you actually get apprehended by ICE, and what you said to them.
When I was getting apprehended, and they were banging on my window to leave or to get out, there was multiple officers telling me to do different things. Some were telling me to keep reversing. Some were banging on my windshield to get out. And I was trying to tell them, I'm leaving, I'll get out of here. I don't want any problems. I'm trying to reverse. I can't breathe because of the tear gas in my car. I can't reverse. I can't continue to reverse while there's protesters behind me. And you guys are banging on my window and just surrounding my car. And they didn't care. They continued to bang. They ignored everything I said. And they broke my window and they dragged me out.
Did you tell them you're a citizen?
I did. That was the first thing I mentioned when I pulled up to where they were all lined up. I got out my car, and that was the first thing I let them know was I'm a citizen. I'm just trying to go to work. I'm just trying to get to work.
Did you tell them you were a veteran?
I did. I also let them know that I was a veteran, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I'm just trying to get to work. I'm not trying to protest them. I'm not trying to fight them. I'm just a man trying to get to work.
What happened once you got taken to detention? Explain what that situation was like for me.
They took us in a SUV, a blacked out SUV, and they took us to a downtown facility, or a facility in downtown LA, where we didn't get there probably till late at night, and they booked us and everything, and they threw us into a cell. They didn't care to check on any medical, issues wrong with us. They didn't care about what happened to us or anything, or why we're even there. They just put us in a cell without anything, a phone call, attorney, speaking to anyone. They just threw us in a cell.
And they just let you sit there for 3 days? I mean, there was no Miranda, there's no you're under arrest, there's no there's all these parts of process that happen if you get arrested for something that are required by the Constitution and by subsequent judicial opinions. You just sat in a cell for 3 days?
Yes, I sat in a cell cell for 3 days. I was in a normal cell the very first night, and Friday morning is when I went on suicide watch, and I was in a cell. And I was on suicide watch from Friday morning to the point where I was released.
The U.S. Attorney's Office, this is Tricia McLaughlin, she's a DHS statement. She says the U.S. Attorney's Office is currently reviewing his case along with those of several other individuals detained during the execution of the federal search warrant in Camarillo to determine whether federal charges are appropriate. Do you think you committed a crime?
I don't think a single crime was committed. I think the crime was committed by ICE and everyone who was there that day.
Did you get to talk to other people who were in that cell with you and figure out how they got there too?
Kind of. I was in the cell with one other person, and it was the teacher who was also arrested, the professor. And we just talked and were in disbelief and just shocked about everything that happened and the way we were being treated and just everything. You obviously served your country. You are a U.S. citizen. You have a job that you were going to. You got tear gas. You got your window smashed. You got essentially physically assaulted. You got detained for 3 days without access to a lawyer. A lot of things that people take for granted as kind of rights. How do you feel about what happened to you? I feel disappointed. I feel disappointed that I would go risk my life for this country, and who knows, maybe I could have died, and maybe who knows what could have happened. I mean, I made it back home, but that's not the case for anyone who serves, for everyone who serves. It's disappointing that this happens to anyone, whether they're a citizen, whether they're here as an immigrant. No one should be treated this way. No one should be treated this way.
My interview with George Redis earlier, an American citizen who was violently detained and held for 3 days despite breaking no laws. In fact, he's a citizen, just one of the many egregious, outrageous, devastating stories we see day in, day out throughout the country as Donald Trump and Stephen Miller subject our friends and our neighbors to this new police state.
This week, we've also seen the transfer of 250 men Trump sent to El Salvador's CICOT torture camp. All Venezuelan nationals have been returned to Venezuela. For many, this has been met with enormous relief, even as some may fear persecution and/or violence at home, and all clearly had reason to leave in the first place. It's currently unclear whether the regime is continuing to use Bukele's torture regime in El Salvador to hold anyone else sent on behalf of the U.S., but as this is the first group of people to ever be released from CICOT, their testimony can shed light on the horrors inflicted there, horrors which the fascist Trump regime has not been held accountable for, and which seem to be only expanding as they send growing numbers of immigrants and refugees into the custody of despotic regimes in war-torn and dangerous countries, an act greenlit by the Supreme Court. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the first ever to be released from CICOT last month, testified to daily beatings during his confinement there. Noah Lannard and Isabella Diaz, reporting for Mother Jones on July 18th, wrote that, quote, a relative shared a video from Venezuelan broadcaster Telesur featuring his brother, Arturo Suarez, on the plane after it landed near Caracas. Quote, we spent 4 months without any contact with the outside world, end quote. Suarez said, quote, we were kidnapped, end quote. He went on to say, quote, we got a beating for breakfast, we got a beating for lunch, we got a beating for dinner, end quote. We can only imagine what we will learn from the full stories of these 230 men held there for 125 days. It seems that we need to speak on the case of Schrodinger's Epstein files, documents whose declassification only serves political interest when it's hypothetical, but whose very existence is denied when those who campaigned on them are in a position to release them. Publicly available corroborating information seems clear. There was, in fact, a child sexual trafficking business run by the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and that Donald Trump was at least very close with Epstein, if not one of his regular clients. Numerous journalistic investigations, victim testimony, and Maxwell's conviction all seem to support these basic facts. It is truly horrific, and no one involved in such things should be allowed to walk the streets in freedom, let alone be in a position of power. Participation in such crimes speaks to a radical lack of empathy, a powerful hatred of women and children, deep-seated desire rooted in the ability to buy, to sell, to overpower human beings. Despite Trump being deeply implicated here, significant parts of the fascist movement have seized on the Epstein case and their conspiratorial zealotry as possibly the closest thing in real life to QAnon's twisted fantasies revolving around political and cultural elites trafficking, raping, and even eating children. Releasing these files was a major campaign promise from the Trump campaign. to a deeply disturbed section of Trump's base steeped in anti-Semitic notions of Jews using and abusing vulnerable people to carry out some nefarious master plan. Now the regime has decided to keep these documents classified. The fact that so many fascists are changing their tune and lining up behind Trump and trying to bury this evidence should tell you about what the fascist movement is for. Note, it's not about protecting children and what they are actually capable of. So no, I don't think, as has been suggested in a number of comments, that we should leave aside the fascism talk and unite with parts of MAGA around the Epstein issue in order to get rid of the individual Trump. I don't think we should do what might seem to some as immediately pragmatic and focus everything on Epstein in a culture that has been trained to see such crimes as mere quote-unquote scandal, and scandal is the only way to topple power. To whatever extent some of MAGA is splitting off over this, the best thing that can happen in that regard is that their eyes be open to the reality of who their leaders actually are and what it would actually mean to seek justice in this world for the children exploited by Epstein or for literally anyone. Because whatever that answer may be, it's not fascism. So to recap, yes, Trump won't release the list because he's on the list. If it gets released, one cannot trust the contents. It further demonstrates Trump's violent misogyny, his moral rot, his sadism, and that of anyone who continues to support him. It is also true that the files would implicate many others in positions of power, of authority across the American political spectrum. Now, in terms of whether this is a mechanism to a golden ticket to oust Trump, personally, I'm quite skeptical and believe this would send us on the wrong path. Again, partially because he is in power. This shit will never really get the light of day, not accurately, and essentially because while it exposes the propensity to cruelty, the aggressive assertion of male supremacy, the dehumanizing worldview at the heart of this regime, it does not target the fascism of it. It leaves intact the program of white supremacy and xenophobia that drive their fascist project to shred democratic rights and the rule of law. Seeing this as scandal is a way to oust a tyrant instead of the devastation it wrought on women and girls cannot be how our side, on the side of justice, operates. Yes, we welcome splits, we welcome cracks, but our eyes must be set on shutting down the whole Trump fascist regime, on demanding they must go. Now turning to some highlights of this week in noncompliance and nonviolent resistance. This week, from July 16th to July 18th, a group of farm workers in Southern California engaged in a 3-day work pause, demanding a pathway to citizenship and an end to the raids and deportations. On Thursday, tens of thousands in over 1,500 locations participated in Good Trouble Lives On, a national day of nonviolent resistance which honors the legacy of civil rights icon John Lewis. Refuse Fascism joined this day of action where we raised the demand Trump must go now. In several areas, organizers held human installations depicting the disappeared immigrants kidnapped and deported to CCOT torture prison. Here is a short interview with some of the participants in Refuse Fascism Los Angeles human installation, The Disappeared, the Fascist Trump Regime Must Go Now, which was held at the LA Federal Building, which houses ICE and Homeland Security.
Tell me what just happened and why you took part.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I took part in a peaceful demonstration of how they're treating prisoners at CCOT. I think it's important right now because these are fundamental rights that are being abused. Right now, we live in a fascist state where people without masks, without identification, with masks, are kidnapping people. They're taking them away without any due process. This is simply fascism. There's no other way to look at it.
I am Mexican American, so it is very personal to me. I'm fortunate that my family came right, like how they call it, the right way. But a lot of people don't have that privilege. Not everyone has the funds for it. Not everyone, I think, not everyone has like the same access to certain programs to get here. Not everyone has the time to get here, which I think a lot of people don't understand. And I mean, just bottom line, the fact that this is even happening in California, which inherently is indigenous to Mexican people, or Mexican people are indigenous to this land, that just on top of the injustice that it already is, just on a human level, the fact that this is my ancestors cultivated this land.
What did it feel like to put this outfit on and to kneel?
I was crying. I know a lot of the other demonstrators were crying as well. It's only a simple little taste of what they're going through. I can't imagine, genuinely, to be stripped of my human dignity like that, just because some people are immigrants, and it's going to turn to you next.
dehumanizing. It's and I'm here voluntarily, right? So if even I can feel that, I can't even imagine what somebody who's actually genuinely going through it is feeling. And you know, like I was telling one of the other participants, it's uncomfortable for us to be out here kneeling on the concrete. You know, we're still feeling the burning on our legs. But I was sitting there going like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, this hurts, but I get to go home after this. I know where I'm gonna spend the night tonight.
It makes you feel like a ghost, you know, dressed in white. It just does. I feel like a ghost, and I get what they try to strip you. They try to strip what it means to be a human, to put you in a uniform. You know, they don't even have what we have today, which is why we're doing this. I'm doing this for humanity, for every human being, so that people can have what we had, which was the American dream, where you can come and you can live that American dream and start at the bottom and rise to the top. That's what the American dream is, and that's what Donald Trump is trying to get rid of, so now we're going to get rid of him.
Do you have a message for people who are seeing this? What do you want them to take from this?
I want you to come out, join us, share, just watch, participate, say something.
So we've been talking about what noncompliance looks like, and now you'll hear it in action. Here's Human Wilder speaking with CNN's Erin Burnett. Human is the founder of the Harlem Baseball Hitting Academy, whose defiant stand in the face of ICE thugs speaks volumes about the kind of resistance we need right now. He is a model of the kind of moral courage and defiance needed, refusing to comply with fascism and showing others how to stand up and not let Trump's Gestapo carry out its horrors.
In New York, a youth baseball coach saying he was forced to step in. He saw ICE agents approaching and starting to question kids that were on the field practicing baseball, all of whom, he says, happened to be American born. That coach, Yeoman Wilder, is now out front. He is the founder of the Harlem Baseball Hitting Academy.
So I go over there and I just see the agents coming by. I'm not paying any attention to it because I've been up when I've seen them up in Washington Heights. And all of a sudden I see them make a beeline to my kids and I said, whoa. And I went over that direction, and then I just hear, what's your name, where you from? You know, are your parents from here? And I said, these are inappropriate questions, and I'm going to tell my kids to invoke their Fifth Amendment right. I got some tough New York City kids, but so for them to be scared means something's really happening. So I just told them there's one way into the batting cage and one way out. So I said, everybody get your stuff, get your gear, and go to the back of the batting cage. And I whispered to them, I said, listen, I'm not going to let them get through me. I said, if you guys got to climb this fence and get out of here, and, you know, that's what we'll have to do. And I just said to myself, I'm willing to die to make sure that you get home.
So that they could get home to their parents.
I'm willing to die today.
What did the bystanders do?
They were, I'm a New Yorker bone and bone, and we're tough people here, but I saw cowards. And I hate to say that as somebody who loves the city.
It's okay, they're kids. Yeah, tell me, what did you want to see, and what disappointed you?
Obeying to authority that was out of line, pissing on the Constitution, and they came up like, I don't care.
How are the kids now?
Our kids, it's no one shows up. I mean, we have one kid showing up. We usually carry, you know, between 25 kids who are playing. And, we usually carry during the summer between 11 and 15 kids. And we're having one kid show up at practice right now.
Shout out to Refuse Fascism NYC, who have organized a Speak Out tomorrow, Monday, July 21st, saying CBS cancellation of The Late Show is collaboration with fascism. Colbert stays, Trump must go. If you are in NYC, join them outside the Ed Sullivan Theater at 4 p.m. Imagine all artists, journalists, writers, producers, all who care about artistic freedom and the right to dissent, using their role, artistry, platform, and every opportunity to call out the fascism of this regime and call in the people who must struggle against it. Imagine everyone who is told to be silent, doubling, tripling down on their truth-telling. Imagine every attempt Trump makes to muzzle dissent, resulting in even more voices of resistance filling the air. Imagine audience of every live audience show wearing t-shirts that boldly say, Trump must go now. So see the show notes for details on tomorrow's action. We are in an emergency situation. We urgently need mass nonviolent resistance and refusal that grinds the machinery of the Trump fascist regime to a halt, creating such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program, cannot govern the country, and cannot even hold onto power. So mark your calendars for July 28th, a day we launch No business as usual. Blow the whistle on ICE. It's going to be lunchtime, nonviolent protests at ICE detention centers or a federal building or an immigration court near you. For an hour, disrupt the routine, disturb the air, get loud, get defiant with noise demos, use those whistles, blow them to shut down ICE and demand Trump must go now. And at 6 p.m., you'll take it back to the streets with 15 minutes of pots and pans, of car horns, whistles, and music, making noise that can't be ignored. And then doing this again on Friday, August 1st, and continuing every week, building strength and defiance. Why? Because the emergency is now. The Gestapo is at the door now. What we're up against isn't just cruelty, although it most certainly is cruel AF. It's a fascist regime consolidating power fast. What we do now will determine whether that consolidation is allowed to be locked in or whether it's met with a nonviolent force powerful enough to stop it. That force won't come from the Democratic Party or the court. It will have to come from us, from the people. And if we are to succeed, the time to act, the time to move heaven and earth to stop this regime that imperils all of humanity and the planet itself, that time, my friends, is right fucking now. Well, it's actually months ago, but now we'll have to do because, look, the clock is ticking. Not to make y'all more panicked than you already are, but to make sure we are always measuring our actions against what we are up against and recalibrating if it doesn't match. So it's time for us to act now in ways that grow into mass noncompliance and nonviolent resistance. Really, millions of us refusing to go along with the fascist program. Now, look, that kind of resistance doesn't appear out of nowhere. It has to be organized. Starting now, all of us need to build up networks and develop forms of nonviolent resistance, together modeling the kind of struggle required, actively and concretely preparing for that time that must come soon, when millions are acting together to really bring the actions of this regime to a halt, to really shut it down, to shut down ICE, to shut down the whole Trump fascist regime, and refusing to stop until Trump must go. Mass refusal and noncompliance. What does that mean? Well, it means people from all walks of life disrupting business as usual. Imagine truly massive numbers of people walking out of work and school, refusing to follow fascist orders. Librarians and others bringing banned books back to libraries, back into schools, non-violently overwhelming ICE's ability to violate people's rights and lives, defying censorship, and flooding the streets with our righteous fury and love for humanity. That's the road we must take, not later, but now. So visit refusefascism.org to learn more, to volunteer, get involved, and donate to support this work. My conversation with Anna Law was recorded on July 9th, and I apologize for the sirens, etc. on my end. I was recording from our national office in New York City, which is noisy. On July 9th, I spoke with constitutional and immigration scholar Anna Law about the Trump regime's assault on birthright citizenship, a core democratic right rooted in the 14th Amendment. At the time of our conversation, it was expected, based on the SCOTUS decision, that the Trump regime would be able to enforce their unconstitutional executive order, stripping babies of their birthright citizenship in more than half of the country. Since the recording, however, a federal judge issued a ruling in a class action suit that prevents implementation of Trump's executive order. This ruling is obviously a welcome development for the statehood of millions of babies and their families, and because it shows that some judges, this one a Bush appointee, are still willing to push back against blatant fascism, even under intense pressure and threats from the regime, its base, and the Supreme Court, which is now dominated by fascists. But let's be clear. This is a fragile, this is a limited, and this is a temporary win. This is not the end of this fight, because we are still living under a fascist regime, one that holds solid control over the Supreme Court, the legislature, and significant influence across the federal judiciary. And that means any right, even those written into the Constitution, can be stripped away unless we stop this regime. With that, here's my conversation with Anna Law, which remains extremely relevant and urgent. It is a profound honor to get to speak with Professor Anna Law this morning. Professor Law holds the Herbert Kurtz Chair in Constitutional Rights at CUNY Brooklyn College. She is a political scientist specializing in U.S. constitutional law and development, U.S. migrations and citizenship law, and policy history. Welcome, Professor Law. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
I want to start with a question that people who don't do the work that you do are confronting for the first time in many of their lives, a question that I don't think most people have ever thought about, which is, what is birthright citizenship? And how is it a really foundational right in the Constitution of this country?
You prefaced your remarks by saying most people have not thought about what is birthright citizenship. I am included among those people, even though I study it, because most people usually aren't aware of citizenship, period, until they have to apply for a passport to leave the country for whatever reason. So birthright citizenship means that if you are born on U.S. soil, you are an American citizen. And other countries might do it differently. There are some countries that your citizenship is descended by blood, that it derives from who you are related to, but not true in the United States. And it is a fundamental right that is ensconced in the U.S. Constitution, and it's been there for a long time for a really good reason.
It's part of the 14th Amendment that was written into the Constitution during Reconstruction. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that came to be and its relevance to today. People might have heard Trump's disgusting speech, his victory speech after the Trump v. CASA decision, where he was like, the 14th Amendment has nothing to do with birthright citizenship. If you want to talk about why that's so blatantly wrong, that would be lovely.
You're right that the Birthright Citizenship Clause is part of the 14th Amendment. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, collectively known as the Reconstruction Amendments, were passed after the Civil War, and they dramatically changed the U.S. Constitution. And the changes in law and politics and policy were so profound that Eric Foner, the historian of Reconstruction, called it the second founding. It is that big of a change. The amendments were passed to abolish slavery and to make sure that African Americans were protected from any discrimination that states may visit upon them after slavery had officially ended. The 14th Amendment is there, and the Birthright Citizenship Clause in particular, because before the 14th Amendment, the legal citizenship status of free Black people was not clear. So we knew that before slavery, enslaved people did not have rights and they were not citizens, but there are many, many free Black people living in all states, slave and free. And because the citizenship status of free Black people was not clear, it opened them up to a whole range of discrimination at the state level. Some states recognize Black people as state citizens. States like Massachusetts considered their free Black people and population, they are citizens of the state of Massachusetts. In some states like Massachusetts, free Black men were allowed to vote, could serve on juries, but other states, free Black people and enslaved people had no rights whatsoever. So there's a couple of issues here, right? So what is the citizenship status of free Black people? And even if a state gives someone state citizenship, what's the relationship between state citizenship and national citizenship, U.S. citizenship? Does one trump the other? What happens? Which one takes precedent? So all of that was entirely unclear until the passage of the 14th Amendment's Birthright Citizenship Clause, stating unequivocally any Black person born on U.S. soil is a federal or U.S. citizen, and that the U.S. citizenship is placed above state citizenship, and the federal government will take a role in enforcing the rights that derive from U.S. citizenship.
Thanks for that breakdown. We've talked about on the show that for Trump and the MAGA movement, ending birthright citizenship has been a central goal for some time, including previous administration talked about it. Now they're at a very different point where it is possible they could succeed. I wanted to have you share on how you see the Supreme Court's decision in the CASA case opening the door to the potential statelessness of millions of people. I've talked to different lawyers, and I think in print, at least, there's been a dismissing of what this case might mean for birthright citizenship. Rightly so, a lot of alarm being sounded on the attacks on the judiciary, especially lower courts. But what does this actually mean for babies and families and the potential statelessness of our neighbors?
So there's two issues that you raised, and one is the policy ramifications, and the other is one of legality and constitutionality. Trump's executive order repealing birthright citizenship that he issued on the first day he entered office, that is blatantly unconstitutional. It has been overturned, and there's continuing litigation. Several district courts have enjoined it. And so the decision you're referring to from a few weeks ago, the CASA decision, is not about the constitutionality of Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. So when some U.S. district courts stopped the decision, they issued a nationwide injunction saying, okay, no changes until the courts figure this out and adjudicate it. But the CASA case is about the scope of the injunctions. Is it to apply nationally, which is what had been going on, or is it only going to apply to the people who filed the legal challenges? So this technical decision that was issued, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, said that the Supreme Court basically got rid of the nationwide injunction and said, okay, well, no, we're not going to do that. And only the people who were part of the litigation would be covered. And so even though that case didn't rule on the merits of birthright citizenship's repeal, it has created a mess, even though the Supreme Court said, okay, yeah. Whatever we just said, that's not going to happen until 30 days later. But now I think that it's going to spawn more litigation. So most people don't think about, oh, when I give birth, I need to consider which, not even the state of where I'm giving birth or the city. Now it's about, if you look at the map of the U.S. courts of appeals, and each courts of appeals, it's the level of the courts right below the Supreme Court, each U.S. courts of appeals district encompasses multiple states. So maybe somebody knows what city and what state they gave birth in, but now you got to know under which set of laws you're operating under. No one's walking in and giving birth saying, oh yes, I'm in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals border, so I'm fine. So that's where we're at, where there's a set of laws that are in place with the states where litigation is pending. And then there's another set of laws in the states where the litigation had not reached the federal courts.
What does this mean for people? I guess the earliest date that they can enforce their unconstitutional executive order would be July 27th. What will that mean for people? Or what could it potentially mean for people? Does it mean people will need to come with their birth certificate to give birth?
It means that parents giving birth are in for a lot of hassle. It means confusion among state health departments about issuing birth certificates. It means that anyone involved in the process of documenting the birth, giving birth, aiding in the birth are now all confused about which set of laws apply. I think we're going to see a lot of confused people. I don't even want to know. We're going to see more lawsuits. We're going to see people who are fearful. We're going to see people probably talking about giving birth in a different state or a different town. But I don't think the Supreme Court or Trump, or maybe I think they do know what is going to happen, which is a lot of fearful, anxious people.
And considering the way that the mass terror that this regime has already very intentionally carried out against whole communities with no regard for criminality or not, criminality being that you look brown to them, one can only assume that the scope goes far beyond those who may or may not be immigrants. It's just going to be racially profiling people. And so I think that there's just a great deal of alarm being felt in many communities. In your forthcoming book, you're writing about the level of government in charge of you, dictating the type of coercive methods used against you. The precedent that this federal government has used previously against oppressed peoples, in particular Native peoples and immigrants. And I'm wondering how you see that through line being revitalized today with the current attacks on immigrants.
I argue in my book that will be out in the spring that the level of government that is in charge of your ability to move around and to live where you want to is determined by the U.S. federal system, which splits power between the federal and state governments. And until 1888, from the colonial period to 1888, the states were in charge of international and interstate migration. And for Native Americans, the federal government was in charge of them. They are not migrants. They are original inhabitants of the country. But the U.S. federal government was in charge in managing relations with Native nations, not the states. After 1888, the U.S. federal government, and for our lifetime, the federal government has been in charge of immigration. This now scares the crap out of me, even though we've had the federal government in charge of immigration since 1888. But the U.S. government in the last budget bill that was passed, the enforcement side, the Department of Homeland Security has more money than armies in other nations. The level of immigration enforcement before, immigration advocates would say, yes, but it's the federal government's doing terrible things, but they are limited by administrative capacity. They don't have enough people to actually go out and arrest a lot of people and to detain them. Well, not anymore. The administrative capacity went through the roof with this last budget bill.
I was reading there's more than armies around the world. There's more money for people to be in concentration camps in the U.S. than there is the budget for the federal prison system. It's definitely this mass criminalization apparatus being built. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I was unable to find recently the deportation numbers. I was able to find detention numbers, arrest numbers. Is that not shared with the public, or?
I have not recently looked at. I looked at the detention numbers kept by TRAC. The deportation numbers I have not seen, but I haven't looked for them recently. I would submit, though, that I'm sure there is somewhere, and because the whole Trump administration is prioritizing those statistics to bolster their message. And it's about a body count for them. It's about the numbers they deport. It's not about the qualitative, are these people criminals? Have they broken criminal law? Because more than half of them have not. The other thing you mentioned, I think it is important to draw the distinction between the Department of Homeland Security now has way more money than the Department of Justice. As Garrett Graff pointed out, he studied the immigration system for a long time. He said the implications of that is that the Department of Homeland Security having a whole lot more resources and money and manpower than the Department of Justice is the Department of Justice is still bound by the rule of law, and the Department of Homeland Security agencies are increasingly unmoored from the rule of law. And that's very scary.
Absolutely. I was wondering if I could ask you a question about this push towards denaturalization, if that's something that you feel comfortable about talking about, because that's another thing that we've gotten a lot of rightful questions about. What does it signal when even naturalized citizens are no longer secure? And how does this fit into the broader, I would say, fascist restructuring of citizenship?
It might be useful to begin with Hannah Arendt, the political theorist who wrote in 1948 in an essay that the citizenship is the right to have rights. Birthright citizenship is so powerful because if you are born on U.S. soil, regardless of who your parents are, with narrow exceptions, you are a U.S. citizen and you have the right to have rights. So your question about denaturalization, which is to strip rights from people who previously had citizenship, is part and parcel of taking away people's citizenship so they have no right to have rights. I think it is also important to underscore why the attack on birthright citizenship, why the denaturalization denaturalization push? Why the ramping up of enforcement priorities and not the Department of Justice, and not funding immigration judges properly? I believe that the attacks on birthright citizenship from Trump are to serve two purposes. One is that ever since 1965, the U.S. immigration system, of the permanent immigration system, so not tourist visas, not student visas, but people who are coming here to stay permanently to get a green card, the racial and ethnic demographics have shifted since 1965 to Latin America, Asia, Southeast Asia, and parts of the world that were previously underrepresented and shut down because of racist national origins laws. So the immigration stream since 1965 has become a lot more racially, culturally, and religiously diverse. And Trump's attack on birthright citizenship and his denaturalization push, I believe, is to serve two purposes. One is to try to reverse the demographic racial changes since the 1965 Immigration Act broadened and diversified the pool of immigrants coming in. And the second one is to allow him to target political enemies, such as Zohran Mamdani, who happens to be an immigrant, such as Elon Musk, that he is an immigrant that he recently had a falling out with. So the attack on birthright citizenship is also to undermine his political opponents and to suppress dissent, to say, you know what, I don't like this Mamdani guy, or I don't like this immigrant, and I will strip their... You can't deport a U.S. citizen unless, if they are a naturalized citizen, you can strip their citizenship and deport them. The bar, by the way, to do that is very high. You have to go through a U.S. district court and the federal courts. You have to show that the person procured naturalization through fraud. But Trump is trying to mess with citizenship in multiple ways to reverse the racial tide of immigration and to go after political opponents and to suppress dissent.
I appreciate you lifting up the goals and what they're going for and what's driving it. And I think it helps people understand like this unhinged attack on Mamdani and, you know, like the threatening of blue cities and what they're doing in LA. You know, you can begin to see the pattern that oftentimes sees like these multiple assaults happening at once and what's connecting them. And I think that helping people see those patterns is really key. I think that your point about like who counts as having rights, who counts as being able to dissent, being able to oppose the government, and even just being able to live in this world, having the right to free speech, having the right to assemble, all of those core principles is really essential. And the notion of just like who belongs and who doesn't. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. You talked about how the state terror apparatus is just grossly being expanded and is only going to get more intense with this bill being passed. What do you see as what can be done to stop this? What forms of resistance, legal, political, and grassroots, do you see as most urgent in this moment?
I think the resistance has to happen on multiple levels, as you pointed out, not just in the legal realm, not just in the court of law, but at organizing of communities. Yes, the litigation on the state level, on the federal level, on every level, but all the organizing has to happen at all the levels at once. It is easy to get overwhelmed and disillusioned and just throw up your hands and say there's nothing I can do. But there is a big difference between what Trump's aspirations are and whether he can carry it out. And it's not a done deal. If you study history, you see very clearly historians are very good at seeing the contingencies. Nothing is a given or a done deal. People always fought back. Starting at the local level, people can organize and protect their neighbors. They can share information. Is ICE in the neighborhood? There are apps for that, for sharing information about ICE being in the neighborhood. There are stories from across the United States. One I remember a month ago, ICE in Chicago complaining that it was really hard to arrest people because people knew their rights.
That was Tom Homan. It was the best clip. I loved it so much.
Yeah, and he's like, in Chicago, people know their rights. So doing know your rights programs for local communities. There are also multiple stories of ICE trying to arrest someone and people around, bystanders, pushing back, just screaming at them and filming. Start local with making sure your neighbors and your friends are okay. People are going to have to lean into what they do best. I mean, no one knows how to do everything. I happen to be an academic. I have a PhD, but I don't have a JD. So I can't help represent people in court. I can't write amicus briefs from a legal standpoint, but I can explain to people, like what I'm doing on this podcast, what is happening to us, and historically, what can we learn from the past. Toni Morrison once said, what can I do where I am? Do something from where you are. Nobody is telling you to go save the world. But if each person does that, if lawyers can file litigation, it's sand in the gears of the machine. Unfortunately, it's not like a werewolf. There's no magic bullet. Oh, here's the garlic bulb. I mean, there's no one magic bullet.
Thank you, Anna, for taking the time to share with us your expertise, your insights, your perspective. For those that want to connect more with your work, where should we go to read more from you?
I am on Blue Sky, frequently posting either news stories or updates or excerpts from my book or recipes that I cook, because you can't be all work all the time. Or you can reach me at my email address, but mainly Blue Sky. I'm there talking to people. Thank you so much for having me on.
We'll definitely link your Blue Sky in the show notes and your website. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. I hope you'll join me tomorrow, Monday, July 28th at 8 p.m. for a special organizing webinar I'm hosting. No business as usual, shut down ICE, shut down the Trump fascist regime. Sign up to join at refusefascism.org or see registration link in the show notes. Your support is urgently needed to get this message of the show and this movement organizing on a whole different level, influencing millions. So become a patron for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism, where your support keeps this show going and fighting against this fascist nightmare. Or make a one-time gift at refusefascism.org. Just hit the donate button or text support to 855-755-1314. Please share this episode far and wide. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Of course, drop a comment on our socials or YouTube. Every share, every word helps build this fight and keep us going. Find us on social media at Refuse Fascism, including on Blue Sky, and follow us on TikTok at Refuse Fascism, where fascism is spelled F-A-S-H-I-Z-M. Much appreciation to Mark Tinkleman, Richie Marini, and Lena Thorne for their amazing work producing the show. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.